Welcome once more on a dismal but mellow wintry day, Sunday, the 12th of February 2023, to another episode of my usual intuitive reactions, but perhaps today a more thoughtful or reflective one. First, it was the deeply unsettling COVID pandemic. Then, the savage Russo-Ukrainian war, a year now, and then a breath-stopping earthquake in Turkey and Syria. With the international media only willing to deal with one story at a time, almost ad nauseum, might I add, the increasingly dangerous situation in Israel and Palestine is being ignored as an uber right-wing coalition government is taking Israel down a perilous path, and in the process, burying Palestinians and their conflict in a pitch-black political hole. And the world reaction? A loud silence, with the odd apologetic whimper hither and thither. One manifestation of this unbridled arrogance by settlers and extremists, empowered by this Netanyahu government, has meant that the attacks on Palestinians and other numerically minority communities is increasing with impunity. And so today, I'd like to take you to the Armenian community in Jerusalem from 1967 till 2023. In 1967, I was freshly out of diapers, but both my dad and granddad recounted to me some years later the levels of hype preceding the Six-Day War of 5th June. President Gamal Abdel Nasser was hyping the political atmosphere so much as he promised that his Egyptian army, alongside those of Syria, Jordan, and Iraq, would reconquer all the territories lost by the Arab forces since the partition plan and the creation of the State of Israel, midwifed, incidentally, by us in the UK. This hype stimulated primal and ugly sentiments in some men and women in Jerusalem who got so carried away by the smell of imminent victory that they started parading, my dad and granddad said, in the streets of Jerusalem, shouting a chilling message. Saturday, we will deal with the Jews, and Sunday with the Christians. They passed in front of the Armenian institutions in the Armenian quarter of the old city of Jerusalem, delivering this same message too. Wow. Well, the war took place, and the Naksa, the utter defeat of the combined Arab forces, led to an occupation of Arab lands, the longest occupation also of Palestinian territories that has lasted almost 57 years. But the Christians and Armenians, as part of the larger constituency, did not turn their backs on this occupation and gloat about how those parades were nipped in the bud. Well, you wanted to deal with us on Sunday, guess what? The shoe is on the other foot. No, that did not happen. Instead, Christians and Armenians have toiled alongside others for decades to remove this violent apartheid-like occupation that would achieve self-determination for Palestinians. During the Oslo years, when I was headhunted by the 13 hierarchical churches of Jerusalem to travel to this holy city and be their second track negotiator during the Oslo process, there were 4 Armenians whose input in favor of Palestinian freedom should be mentioned here, I feel. The first, among equals, was Professor Manuel Hassassian, for long years vice principal of Bethlehem, who was also working on the Jerusalem file with Faisal Husseini at Orient House. Manuel is a friend. Then there was the late Dr. Albert Aghazarian, for long years at Birzeit University, who became a powerful spokesperson for the Palestinian cause, not least at the Madrid conference with Dr. Hanan Ashrawi. Albert was a friend. The third Armenian was George, or Kevork Hintlian, who networked with the media on the role of Christians and their institutions in Jerusalem, struggling against injustice and in favor of peace. He too is a friend. And finally, allow me to add here yours truly, with my second track duties, conflict resolution legal background, and my ecumenical relations with the West, as I galvanized or helped galvanize support for a just and peaceful Palestine. Now, we did it not for glory, but because all 4 of us felt that these territories, this small patch of land, is our homeland and our cause too. A reminder here, the 700 to 750,000 refugees in 1948 included many Christians and also many Armenians, some of them my own relatives, including my mom, who was then a young teenager. After all, the demolition of houses, the confiscation of Jerusalem identity cards, thereby their residency, and the punitive measures were applied against Muslims and Christians alike by this occupation. Now, many starts immediately after 1967 by Israel tried to create a rift between Christians and Muslims. But it failed, because Christians, who have incidentally been key in the post-colonial nation-building history of many countries in the Arab world, refused to play along with this clever ploy. They refused to become quislings. The meeting between Moshe Dayan, the then defense minister, I should say the meetings, as they were plural, and the Armenian patriarch Yerishe Derderian is part of the folkloric lore of that community and that part of the world. But those meetings bore no fruit because the ordinary Armenian men and women in the community refused to betray the Palestinian cause. It was genetic, it was innate, it was inbred. It is not so much a matter of talking about ethnicity or even religion, which some groups make a big story out of, regardless of the propaganda and the spurious claims. It's not really ethnicity or even religion that binds Palestinians of different communities and backgrounds together. It is much more a question of culture and politics. And so the crowds in the 1967 parading in the old city and baying against Christians must have then felt the error of their ways. Now, fast forward to later years leading up to 2023. Many Orthodox Israeli Jews, some of you might know this, use the passageway from the Armenian quarter to the Jewish quarter where they pray at the Kotel or the Western Wall that is also known as the Wailing Wall in Arabic, حائط المبكى. They never miss an opportunity to spit at the priests in the Patriarchate or at the Armenian Christian institutions. There have been so many scuffles between young Armenians and their religious Israeli Jews, some of those young Armenians being seminarians. And what has the police station down the road done? Well, I don't want to answer that question. I just leave it blank, and you can draw your own conclusions. But equally sinister, the graffiti on the walls of the Armenian Quarter never miss an opportunity to remind Armenians that they are unwelcome in this Jewish land and that they should leave and go. But ask yourself, go where? Since this has been their country for hundreds of years. Now, does any of this ring alarm bells? Does it bring forth hints of 1967, perhaps with different messengers, though? Some members of the current Israeli government would be happy if they can get rid of the Palestinian presence. Transfer them to Jordan, some still believe. Give them visas, facilitate the visa process so they can emigrate to the West. Do anything to see the back of all this unwelcome demography so they can enjoy the geography of the land and annex it, call it Judea and Samaria, as if we are living in the era of the Old Testament. International law? Nah. Justice? No. Peace? Nah. Dignity and legitimacy? Forget it. Just manage those occupied people like vassals for Israel. And does anyone care, from successive US presidents to our own successive PMs to the European Union? No, too. Mind you, they are far too busy these days defending these values, democracy, the occupation of someone else's land. But with a slight difference. We're not talking of Palestine here. The irony of how 1967, with its fleeting racism, has now been supplanted by an occupier that only wants to oppress those who are not Jews in the land of their birth, lives, and livelihoods. What happened in 1967 was wrong. It was calumnious. But what is happening to Palestinians today, Muslims and Christians alike, is a savage travesty that is apartheid superimposed by attempts at ethnic cleansing. Sheikh Jarrah, Masafer Yatta, Khan al-Ahmar, Silwan, the dangerous E1 project that will cut off Jerusalem from the northern and southern West Banks and the north and southwest banks from each other. The whole land occupied under international law is being grabbed by illegal settlements and by even more, if that's possible to be more illegal than illegal, by more illegal outposts. And it could well be that Dr. Albert Aghazarian is dead. He's a loss to the Armenian and Palestinian communities. That George Hintlian maybe has slowed down due to age and weariness. Even Dr. Manuel Hassasian, presently the head of mission or ambassador in Denmark, is also part of the old generation. So am I, by the way, as my diapers are long forgotten and my bones ache at times. But I do not despair. Why? Because I also realize that the Palestinian cause, despite the unending attempts to quash it and bury it, is now being stewarded by a younger, and I underline younger, generation of men and women in Palestine and the diaspora who are super educated, super digital, super savvy, and super committed. Go to any conference, any webinar, any colloquium happening today. Listen to the interviews they give when they are allowed to give the Palestinian viewpoint. And you can realize the eloquence and the fluency, not of the language alone, but also of the ideas and the determination behind those ideas. They are the future. And Israel cannot frighten them because they are capable. And they have justice on their side. No matter how you try to rewrite reality, and no matter the malevolence or indifference of others. But let me end with a realistic note of caution. My dad and granddad in 1967 were extremely concerned, probably also quite frightened by the chanting crowds promising hell and damnation against Jews and Christians in 1967 after what they perceived to be a victory that never was. Today, I too would be concerned and frightened if divisions and extremism take root within the Palestinian psyche. After all, if Palestinians want to achieve the goal of liberation, the goal of freedom, the goal of self-determination, the goal of having a free and independent state next to a secure Israel, such attitudes should be washed away once and for all, so that the political culture, politics and culture coming together, that unites a whole people, irrespective of their backgrounds, can be the real glue that holds the dreams of millions and millions of Palestinians together. My grandfather died. He was a wonderful man. My father died. He suffered a lot. I too will probably die before I see the day when such a young generation will actually be able to right a historical wrong that began at the early decades of the 20th century. But it doesn't matter. Justice is not like an iPhone. You don't just press on an app and you get instant satisfaction, instant response, instant fulfillment. It takes a long time. But at the end, it delivers. Take care.